You are listening to the Novel Writing Podcast, episode 231. I'm your host, Colleen Mitchell. Grab a cup, cozy up, and let's get to writing. Today I'm talking with Steve Laube. With multiple decades in the publishing industry, he's a renowned literary agent, editor, and founder of the Steve Laube Agency, as well as the publisher of Enclave, which works with Christian authors of speculative fiction. He's a staple at the Realmmakers conferences and is also, as far as I know, the most sought after for pitch appointments. This year, he gave an amazing talk on the spiritual life of a writer, and the theme that stuck with me the most from that talk was in handling rejection. Whether you're pursuing traditional or self-publishing, rejection is always part of the process, and it's never easy to deal with. Steve's newest book, Sacred Margins, dives deep into the spiritual lives of writers and how we can face the difficulties that come with every writing career. Steve, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me.
Let's just dive in. What is the short version of how you got into the publishing industry?
Short version, yeah. I've been around for 45 years, so there's no short version. I pretty much started as a college student working at the local bookstore that was next to the campus. And it was one of those things where I kept finding books that were misplaced or mispriced. And finally, the cashier asked if I needed a job. And I happened to need one. So I started working there part-time while I was a student. And then after graduation, became full-time and ended up working there 11 years. Became the manager of the store. We had multiple stores in the city. And then in, was it 1992, I became an editor for Bethany House Publishers. And while I stayed in Phoenix, Bethany is based in Minneapolis. So I became a remote editor in an era when there was no such thing. They didn't have Zoom. They still had fax machines back then, for goodness sakes. And even email was kind of a brand new thing. So I ended up working directly with a lot of authors. And then in 2003, I became a literary agent and have been that ever since. So there's a lot of machinations within each one of those transitions, but you asked for the short version, so that's where I am today.
How did you get involved with Enclave in particular?
Oh, that's a fun story. So I've always been an advocate of science fiction and fantasy, but for the longest time, especially in the Christian market which was my focus, there was a dearth of options. You had a few authors, Stephen Lawhead, a few others like that were writing kind of in that area. And you had Frank Peretti's This Present Darkness, which technically falls under the category of speculative because it's supernatural. But that's not pure science fiction, and that's not pure fantasy either. So you had to realize there was really not a lot of choices if you were a fan. And I was one. I've read thousands of science fiction and fantasy novels in my lifetime. So when I was at Bethany House, I tried to bring that category into the company, but I waited 7 years before I pitched the first one. And that first author that I pitched was Karen Hancock, who ended up winning 4 consecutive Christie Awards for Best Speculative Fiction. And then I also acquired and published Kathy Tyers, and who's now, as she calls herself, an elder statesman of the genre and the category. But when I left Bethany House, the genre left with me because there was no one in the company that really understood it. So Bethany House re-entered the category a few years later. They got an editor who did. But meanwhile, the category languished until in the mid-2000s, a fellow named Jeff Gerke started a company called March Your Lord Press. He was doing that. And I actually told him, I said, I'm glad you did it so I didn't have to. But as any entrepreneur understands, when you're in a small business, it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. You do all the heavy lifting. You not only wash the toilets, you typeset the books, and you do all the editing and the cover design. And after a while, it becomes a little overwhelming, and there's not a good return on your investment. So Jeff called me one day for advice, and we were just talking, and I talked to a lot of people in our industry on those kinds of things. And I said, Jeff, your solution here is you need to sell it. Sell it to somebody who wants to take it over. And he goes, well, who? And I went, why not me? And he paused, and I paused. And then I said, did I just say that? 2.5 weeks later, I owned it. And then I realized I needed to change the name. March Your Lord Press is a clever name, There's some historical reason behind it, but the initials MLP also stands for My Little Pony. So there were some challenges in the marketplace. People would talk about the Lord Marcher books or the Marcher Lord books, and they never got the name right. So I spent 6 months canvassing pundits and even did a survey of fans. And Enclave, Enclave, just like it sounds, rose to the top. It happened to be my favorite before I began all the searching. And so it was very interesting that it was a dramatic endorsement of that name.
And now
So
Enclave
that was
is known
2014.
for Christian.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was 2014. So the last 12 years, that's been its name and it developed its reputation. In 2022, I sold the company to Oasis Family Media, who then immediately turned around and hired me to run it, which was not necessarily my intent, but I understood their reasoning. When it's kind of your baby and you understand well, to put it in fiction terms, you understand where all the bodies are buried. Uh, and I said, well, sure, as long as you'll keep the team. So they kept the team and everything moved forward as if nothing had changed. It just meant the financial responsibility shifted from me to a larger company, which was a very good move on their part and for us. So that's where we're at today.
That's really cool. And I love seeing all the Enclave authors at Realm Makers. So it's really fun to connect with them.
Yeah, we had almost 20 of them there. That was quite astounding. We didn't set out to do it that way, but I think the location and the opportunities that were presented made it very, very accessible because we have around 150 backlist titles and we continue to do 12 to 15 new books a year. So there's a wonderful body of literature that Enclave has to offer the speculative reading community.
So let's talk about Rejection because 12 to 15 books a year means you don't take on a lot of new authors, and that's going to be the case across the board. So this is a big question, but how do authors learn to handle rejection so that they don't quit writing?
Sure. And realize that for me, Enclave is a very teeny, eensy beensy bit of what I do because my primary work is as a literary agent, which is a separate company. And as an agent, I receive approximately 2,000 proposals a year. It averages around 50 a week. And in 2025, last year, I took two of them. So there's your percentage. That means my job is to say no. And in fact, it was kind of funny. Bob Hostetler, who works for me as one of my agents, he had been 30 some odd years as a pastor before joining me as an agent. And he was also a writer, so he understood rejection. But after about 6, 8 months, he and I talked, and I said, "So how are things going?" And he goes, "I didn't realize, I mean, as a pastor, you don't tell people no, you encourage them. You show them the path to, God's no is not always a forever and all those kinds of spiritual sides of things. But my job is to say no to people, and that's not fun." I went, "Yeah, welcome to the world of agenting. It is a fact of life. But if you're in the arts in any form, writing, dance, drawing, artistry, design, music, vocal, instrumental, if you don't know how to handle the no or it's not right for us, you're in the wrong profession. And if you're looking for the easy yes, then you're going to get lazy because easy yeses are too easy and you don't work for it." It was described to me once to one of my daughters who's a musician. Someone said, "Do you know who your dad is?" And I went, she goes, "Yeah, he's my dad." I went, No, you're a musician. So when you go to audition for a solo performance or something, and you're in that room and there's that guy in the back of the room where the shadow covers the top half of his body, and you sing three lines and you hear a shout, "Next," that's your dad. And she laughed and went, "Oh, oh, okay, I get it." And I kind of laughed. I said, "Oh, that's a fun story, but there is a truth to it." Now, the danger is making it sound like I'm this grumpy, horrible troll that sits under a bridge and exacts a toll on everyone who comes by. And that's not the case. I've been asked for many years why I'm so hard on writers. Why do I say no? And I say because God asks for excellence. And when we're in the business, and I'm using that word intentionally, when we're in the business of changing the world will not take second best. It will only take the best. Now we can make the argument that there's a lot of schlock in the general market. Okay, certainly there is. But that's not the point. The point is our competition isn't necessarily the easy route. The competition is to make this book so good that the author disappears and the story comes forward and pops the reader right in the nose and makes their eyes water and makes them think differently about life. That is the power of words. And there's no other vehicle that does it that way with that kind of strength. So rejection, yeah, I'm not going to dismiss it and say, oh, sure, no big deal. Look, I've been rejected. My gosh, you think I don't know what it feels like? I certainly do. When I teach this, I, uh, I use a very picturesque metaphor. I say, imagine your manuscript or your work is your thumb, and you have a hammer in the other hand, and you're setting a nail or something on, some work that you're doing. And you rear back and you strike what you think was the nail, and it's your thumb that you hit. The thing is, you see it happen, but you don't feel it right away because there's something in your thumb that's called a language center that moves slowly up your hand and it moves down your forearm to your elbow, up to your shoulder, through your neck, and then it comes out in words that are not necessarily appropriate. And it hurts, and you either scream or you say rather flagrant language, and you're mad and you're upset and you can't believe this happened. But if you're a writer, you put your hand back up on that piece of wood and hold onto the nail, and you hit it again, and you miss the nail again. After you've hit the nail 17 times, you no longer feel a thing. You can be rejected all day long, and it's like, okay, whatever. I can't feel it. It's not personal. And that's probably the first thing every writer needs to learn. Rejection is not personal. We think it is. I jokingly say, well, now that I've met you, I can reject you easier. That's not the case. It's not the case at all. There might be a case where your book gets picked up by an agent and then it's sent to an editor and it gets rejected over and over and over and over and over and over again. Perfect example. This just came to me last week because 2 years ago, year and a half ago, I had a client who had written a proposal for a nonfiction book called The Theology of Play, Play. What a clever idea. What a clever way to, dig into the biblical and theological understanding of entertainment and what does that mean? And, all of the, good and bad, et cetera, about that. What does that mean? And we got 100% no. And I was blown away. I couldn't understand it because the author was a very good author and the book was well done. She had the right platform, everything along for it, but we couldn't get any traction. Well, last week, I saw two different publishers come out with two different books that the bottom line soundbite for each book is the theology of play. In other words, her book was being presented to publishers that had already seen proposals on the same topic and either had decided they weren't interested or they had already put the book under contract. Publishers aren't going to tell us that, but the author, all they can do is shrug their shoulders and move on to the next idea and maybe turn the idea into a series of magazine articles or blog posts or subtext posts or something so they can still work on their concepts and maybe work the concept into another chapter of another book someday instead of going, oh my gosh, I'm a terrible person. I need to quit. I need to stop writing because people said I'm a terrible writer. Nobody said that. Not one person.
The critic in their brain said it.
Oh my gosh, yes. You're your own worst critic if you're a writer. If you can, what was it? I think it's attributed to Leonardo da Vinci or someone like that, that good art is never finished. It's simply abandoned.
I don't think I've
So
heard
as a
that before.
writer, at some point, you have to stop tinkering and toss it out. You have to abandon it and toss it out into the the rabid dogs who are going to tear it to tiny little pieces and spit on it because that's what rabid dogs do. But your art is done and you've done as best you can.
I talk about it how yes, the book is your baby, but you need to send that baby into the world to become an adult and it needs to learn how to handle itself.
Yeah. Yeah. Yesterday I was talking with someone who was dealing with rejection. So it's interesting we're talking about that today, but they actually asked the question, how do I develop a thick skin? I mean, this is so hard. I said, well, you're not going to like my answer, but to develop a thick skin means getting 40 lashes and not just today, but all the time. It doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. It will always hurt. Someone writing you a one-star review. I mean, I have a book now that's on the internet and I got a four-star review. Oh my gosh. Like, hey, at least put a comment with your four-star review. Tell me why it was not the best book you've ever read in your entire life. Well, of course it isn't the best book they've ever read in their entire life. That's not the nature of reading. But I will tell you, personally, it was like, huh, that's interesting. I'm waiting for the one-star review. And by the way, people, don't go out there and put one-star reviews just to make me happy. Only write them if you truly believe it was a waste of time. But as an author, you have to take the good with the bad because the point of writing is not for accolade. The point of writing is not to make you feel better and have a name on a book and be famous. I mean, there's dangers in being famous. There's also dangers of letting the rejection get to you. The purpose of writing is to be faithful to the calling. And if you're writing it as an assignment, like a college student, oh, I have to write a paper on XYZ. I don't like XYZ, but I have to write it. Ugh. It's a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad thing, but you do it because you have to. So did you really apply yourself? Did you really work hard at it? Or did you just try to get through it? Well, that's not being called to writing. But I imagine every novelist who is listening to this, and if you also write or dabble in nonfiction, it's the same principle to be faithful to the story, to be faithful to the writing. And if the goal is to be published, well, good luck. It can happen. I'm not saying it can't. But if that's your whole goal, then that means your entire identity and feeling of quote unquote success is wrapped up in something in which you have no control. This is why a lot of people will say, well, I can publish it on Amazon in 5 minutes. I say, you sure can. There's 300,000 new books uploaded. I mean, not three. Yeah, it's 300,000 every day.
That's a painful statistic.
It's outrageous. It used to be 3,000, 30,000, whatever the number is. It's an astronomical number that is beyond comprehension. And it, I suspect many of you have gone to Amazon, gone to some online site, and you clicked on the look inside and you tried to read the first paragraph and realize that it's garbage and go, how did this person get published? Oh, they self-published it. Ooh. Now you don't trust anything. So how do we curate what's worth our time? And that's the rub for all publishing and all writing anyway. But you see, there's a reason for the gatekeeper, like a Steve Laube, like an editor or a publishing company. There's a reason, and this is why certain publishers, certain authors end up winning a lot of the awards. Doesn't mean a self-published author can't, because they do. I mean, there's a book on the New York Times bestseller list right now that was self-published a year and a half, 2 years ago, called Theo of Golden.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah, if you've not heard of it, go get it, go buy it. It's worth to read. I first heard about it from a review from someone I trusted their reviewing. I bought it, a self-published copy of it. Well, Simon and Schuster got a hold of it after hearing of that after it had sold 100,000 copies as a self-published book, and it's now selling 100,000 copies a week. It has over 2.5 million copies in print and is number one on the New York Times bestseller list, and it's a faith-based novel.
Nice.
Some 70-year-old guy writes this story, and his daughter comes along and saying, well, we need to figure out how to market this thing. And he went, okay, whatever you want. And here we are over a year and a half later. But people hear that story and go, oh, good, well, I can do that too. No, you can't. That's the outlier. That's the story. That's the reason we've heard the story, because it's a story. It's not the norm. Anyway, I've meandered already well past your question, so you got me going.
That's okay. I think we covered quite a lot there. But you said something earlier about how being successful has its pitfalls too. So
Yeah.
when we were at the conference, you said success can ruin more writers than failure does. Can you talk more about that?
Oh, certainly, because I've seen it firsthand. The problem with success is it makes you feel like you're entitled and that you're all that. So it hits right in the solar plexus of something called pride. And pride is considered one of the seven deadly sins for a reason. It's why the scriptures speak an awful lot about pride and its counter, humility. There is a necessity because if it becomes all about me as an author, well, I stop being a nice person. I stop being someone who cares about others. I end up caring only about me or about the money or about the performance of a book. I mean, I, I'm not going to tell stories that you can identify who they are, so I'm going to be very generic here. But there are authors that I've known or worked with that they end up, on the bestseller list, and then all they do is complain. How come my book is sold 20% less than my last one? What's wrong with these people? It's a better book. I know it because I wrote it. I had one author that I worked with whose hubris was so extreme that they wrote a 16-page screed against their editor, which I didn't know was being done, and sent that email to that editor. And that editor they were basically destroyed emotionally because the email was vicious, it was personal, and it was completely unwarranted. The president of that publishing company called me and told me that my client was no longer allowed to email their company at all. They blocked his email. The communication could only come through me. Okay, that's an extreme. That's why it's a story, because it's the extreme. But you see, success can turn into something really ugly, and it destroys the soul. It absolutely undermines the very purpose for which you are put on this planet, and that is to build the kingdom and to be there for others. If it's all about money, okay, there are people who write just for the money. There are people who write for their living, and I get that. There's no there's no condemnation of that at all. Don't hear me wrong. But if that becomes the sole focus, I mean, I once had two authors that they were co-authoring a book. The publisher flipped whose name was first on the front cover. The person who was now second accused the other of engineering the switch and then accused me of engineering the switch. Her book wasn't even out yet. And suddenly there was this hubris walking into the room, creating all sorts of trouble merely by a ranking. The problem is the person whose name was first was the speaker. They were the person that was going to be doing the media. They were the person that was going to be the one out and about. So it made sense from a publisher's business standpoint to have that person's name on the top. But you see, right there's another example. Oh, I've got dozens of horror stories. Even last year at a writers' conference, a former client came up to me and apologized for their descent into hubris when they fired me and ended up in a very bad place in their life after receiving the largest contracts in the history of their entire career and let it get to their head. And that person came to me and said, I can't believe I did that 10 years ago. And I ruined everything because I let success get to my head. Yeah, I know. I saw it. And, there's forgiveness, there's relationship building. We had a wonderful conversation, but that's not easy to handle.
How do we guard
So
against
what
it
you have to
then?
do, you have to, I mean, read my book. I have an entire chapter on the dangers of success. And there's a true element to it. The other challenge, and I'm going to challenge every listener here, is that before you even start pitching your book or even before you start your writing career, and if you've already started, sit down today or sometime this week or this month and define success. What does that mean? What does that look like? I mean, quantify it, write it down, put it on a piece of paper, how you define success in your eyes. Then step back and see if there's hubris involved in that, if there's pride. And if there is, then maybe you need to reset your expectations because when expectations are not met, it turns into anger. And that's where rejection turns into anger. Oh, this person's an idiot. They don't realize how brilliant I am. Well, you might be brilliant, but you don't know how to write brilliant. Not yet. Let's try again. I mean, goodness, I was in athletics. First time you shoot a free throw in basketball, you're probably not going to make it unless it's pure luck. It's after the 1,000th time, then you actually start having a percentage that start to go in because you get a feel for it. The same thing with writing. There are some people that are gifted from the moment they are born to be a writer. They have something in their genetics and something in their DNA code that makes them brilliant. They still have to work at it. Then you have others like me who did not have the athletic skills, but ended up being a starter on the basketball team. I wasn't the star. I was the fifth guy on a team of four all-stars, but I got to play with them. So I mean, it's a matter of just working at it, and then being able to accept your role and your place in that. So define success, and that way, when it's achieved, you realized, oh, this really wasn't about me. Well, this is a gift.
Another thing you said at the conference was that indifference, how did you say it? The verdict of indifference is the most devastating. Would you call indifference a form of rejection?
Oh, it's absolutely rejection. It's the worst kind.
Worst kind. Okay, tell us more.
It's the worst kind at all. I mean, think of it. Let's say you sent me, well, let's not even make it right about writing. Okay. Now, we're not best friends. We don't know each other. We've met once before. This is our second time meeting. You're a delightful person. But let's say you draw something and you think it's absolutely gorgeous. And you bring it to me at the next conference and you hand it to me. And I say, yeah, oh, yeah, fine. I'll put it in my bag. And I barely glance at it. Now, did I reject you? No, I accepted your gift, but I accepted it with indifference. And you kind of stop and you turn around and kind of go, well, was that rude? Or did I just catch him when he was busy? And now I'm embarrassed. I'm actually, goodness, I'm ashamed. I mean, well, now you start self-talking, right? So imagine that with your writing. And you put something in front of me and we talk about everything except your writing because I'm indifferent to it. I'm not interested. And that is what happens to every writer. Okay. So because I said, before we begin our talk here, that having written this book, Sacred Margins, I really have a sense of what it means to be a writer and to be rejected and to go through all of the emotions that happen. So I was at a writer's conference where my book was brand new. It was being debuted and a bunch of copies on the table. And I'm, being that author who's trying not to be very prideful about having this book on the table. And I'm standing about 20 yards away from the book table, and I saw someone walk up to that pile, pick up the book, and then put it back down and walk away. And I thought, well, gee, at least turn it over. At least flip through the pages. My goodness sake. That was indifference. It was rejection in a form. They didn't do it to me in person, but I saw it. And that's exactly what happens on Amazon when someone clicks to the next thing and not to yours. It's indifference. Like, not interested. I already have a book like that. Goodness sake. What a horrible cover. I'm moving on. Says, oh, it's that author. What a joke. I'm not going to read them. I'm not going to spend my money on them. That's rejection. And so indifference is the worst form. And the thing is you never see it, but you know it's happening. And that's not happiness. Or it's getting a form rejection letter. And I can tell you firsthand, of course we have form rejection letters. I mean, do you really think that agents are going to personalize every rejection letter that they send? Of course not. You don't have the time. Also, I would say 25% of the time, if I do provide a specific critique, the person comes back with You blinkety blink blank, blink, blink, blank, curse me out and say I'm stupid and I don't understand what I've read. I'm not kidding. It is unbelievable when you try to help and they slap you across the face, rejecting me, rejecting my help. It kind of makes me think twice of wanting to help the next person. Yet at the same time, the majority of people are very grateful. And let me put it this way, if you get a specific critique in a rejection letter, it is gold because the person providing it is not required or obligated to do so. And if you have expectation of having that, you set your expectations wrong. Literary agents are not free critique services. That's why there's freelancers who have critique services that you pay for. I mean, think about it. I reject something. I'm not making any money. I mean, my job is to find the fleck of gold in the mud while I'm gold panning and hope I get enough of it that it turns into a nugget that I can then sell. That's the commercial side of this art. So you see all these books behind me for those of you who are watching the video, and it is my understanding, the video is a a bonus for those who are subscribers. So here's a commercial right here.
Thank
She
you.
didn't ask me to do this, but it's a commercial. But you see all these books behind me. I mean, these are successful books. They're published. I bought them, or they're books that I wrote. So I'm putting them behind me because there's my display of hubris. But then I also have Charles Spurgeon up in the corner, and I've got John Calvin and Martin Luther behind my shoulders staring at me to remind me of the quality of literature that's necessary. But you see, books can make a difference and can change the world. So that's what we're all about.
If listeners remember just one thing from this talk, what do you want it to be?
To write faithfully and have no expectations. You see, if you turn writing into a transaction, then you've put some sort of value on the end result that is not in your control. And that's not healthy. I started writing Sacred Margins just because I basically wrote the preface on an airplane, not thinking it was a preface. I was just doodling basically in my journal on the nature of margins and what are they. And I ended up writing what is the preface of the book. And I went, huh, well, that's interesting. I've got a book here called Sacred Margins. I wonder what the chapter titles look like. So I created chapter titles. And I thought, how many of these chapters have I done talks on? And then I realized, wow, look at this. I actually have the foundational work for a quarter, a third of what this book could be and begin to write it. Not because I thought it could get published, but because it needed to come out. Because I've been teaching on it for 15 years and been thinking about the spiritual life for my entire Christian life. And that idea of writing faithfully without a end goal, when I was done, it was just, where did this come from? Even as I showed chapters to my wife, she goes, what's got into you? I mean, this is, I went, well, I've talked on these topics. She goes, yeah, I know, but this is different. I said, yeah, there's something here. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do with it. And then pulling the book together, and now here we have. So take that as advice. You don't sit down because you want to write a story that's going to make you famous. You sit down and write a story because it needs to get out. And you can't not write it. Your family thinks you're weird. Um, I mean, Colleen has a cat who thinks she's marvelous, but she doesn't read. So at least much as we know, she might actually be reading at night. So, you might have one of those kind of cats. But you see, people write for the wrong reasons, and then they get themselves into psychological, spiritual, and even physical trouble because it affects them negatively. Instead, write faithfully and then just let it work out, and realize this isn't something you're going to learn tomorrow. It could take you 10 years. It could take you 20 years. Or you could be like the author of Theo of Gold and you be 70 years old and write your first book.
Yeah. What you just said with just write to get it out, that's how I started my book series was I just needed to get it out of my head. I didn't care if people bought it. I just needed it out of my head and in a physical form. And that's what happened.
There
And
you go.
yeah.
There you go. And then you step back and go, whoa, There are times where even now, it's been a year since I wrote the book, I'll open it up and went, who wrote that? It's either one of two reactions of, that's really good. I obviously I didn't write that. Or there's other sections where I'll look at and go, oh man, I wish I could have that back. I could certainly phrase that a lot better than I did. But you know what? That's where the internal critic is always going to be there.
Yep. I
You'll
do the same
always
thing.
think you can do better. You've got to be able to just say, I did the best that I could at that moment and in that moment in time. And we will go from there and hope it means something to somebody at some point.
So where is the best place for people to pick up Sacred Margins?
Sacred Margins, if you want to buy it from Amazon, you can. They don't discount it for some reason. But remember, they're not a bookstore. They're a search engine. So, if the algorithm says they need to drop the price, they will. You can also go to Shop the Word. That's ShopTheWord, just like it sounds, shoptheword.com. And they have everything 30% off all the time
Nice.
for any book that they carry. And so my book is 30% off there, which is kind of cool. And I think if you buy $25 or $30 worth, you get free freight. So buy 3 copies. Uh, give 2 of them away. Or go together with your book club and have one person buy them and then distribute them that way. Because the book is priced in a way intentionally that it will sell. So it has a retail price of only $15, and books aren't priced that cheap anymore these days.
Nope.
But that's the point. You can also get it on ebook anywhere, in any form. I mean, I didn't do the exclusive with Amazon. You can buy it in ebook anywhere. I guess any bookstore anywhere can order it. I haven't checked, but it's a small publisher. It's a small book. It's a narrow market because we're talking to writers. So you're not going to find it on the front rack at Barnes and Noble. That would be a mistake on their part.
But it could work in your favor.
It could. I mean, if they want to buy a few thousand copies, I'm more than happy to sell them. But
Right.
that isn't how it works.
All right. And if anybody wants to work with Enclave or with your agency, where is the best place to direct them?
Okay. Remember, they're 2 separate businesses,
Right.
and I just happen to be the head of the agency, but then we have many agents. We have 4 agents that work for us. And you go to stevelaube.com. It's laube.com, and go to the guidelines section. It's all laid out, almost a paint by numbers, on how to put together your book proposal and how to contact and send it to us, and pick one of the agents, not necessarily me, but one of them that you feel is the best fit for you. For Enclave, it's specifically for speculative fiction. The agency, by the way, is very diverse. It's everything from the sweet romance to systematic theology. I mean, everything in between. But with Enclave, it has to be speculative fiction. That means science fiction, fantasy, or supernatural. And again, there is a for writers section on the website, which has our guidelines. And send it there, and it shows up in an inbox, gets reviewed. And we've had, well, let's see, two recent contracts in the last 4 months that were issued based on a blind submission through that portal.
Nice.
So it does happen. It has to come to us ready. It can't be, go back and fix it and this be the 79th time you sent me that one.
Mm.
Although one rejection is not forever. Make sure people understand that. But these were people that it was their first time and we went, whoa, this is amazing. And those books will come out in 2027. So it's kind of cool.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it has been wonderful talking with you. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a delightful conversation. You ask very good questions. And there are things that are universal for every writer. And I think every writer needs to, like I said, number one, start with a definition of success and then just gird your loins for rejection, because it's going to happen even after you're published, because someone is going to read it and not like it. And that's okay. It wasn't written for them.
Correct. All right, everybody, that is it for today's episode. To watch the video of this interview and support the podcast, please head over to the Substack link in the description. Thank you for joining us, and remember, that first draft is supposed to be garbage. Do you need help getting your novel to the next level? I offer one-on-one book coaching for fiction writers, whether you're outlining, rewriting, or preparing to self-publish. Learn more using the links in this episode's description.